Thank you for taking this call, taking some time out. It's very hard to find people that are willing to actually come and talk, on camera and stuff. So I'm very glad to have you on. Do you want to say a few words about like who you are, your experience, any topics you're like really passionate about?
Well, okay. No, not really.
No, okay.
There's not really much to say. I guess I'm a junior in college studying social science. Um, I'm interested in pursuing a graduate degree in law from the United States. I'd say pretty much everything I know about politics philosophy I learned in the last 6 months. So
Interesting.
there you go.
Awesome. I'm Kindred. You can see my YouTube channel. I do a bunch of, I think, beatboxing is what I'm known for right now. Spend some time thinking about stuff. I'm starting to get more interested in chatting with people and trying to understand their ideas and debating people who are up to have this debate. Just a little bit background for myself. I did something close to, I believe, something you mentioned. You also studied in university. I actually was majoring in basically cognitive science
Okay.
and some tangents into like math and physics and stuff. So yeah. In terms of like where you want to go with this, did any of the topics I sent you, were any of those like piqued your interest at all? I had a previous debate with Sir Warmups on the transgender and abortion topics. So if you want to hear about that and you have some other extra ideas you want to chat about, I'm happy to like talk about those things. Or if you want to do a totally fresh topic, I'm also happy to do that as well.
Well, I'm happy to talk about anything. I guess I'd like to clarify what your views are. Um, so, do you support the legality of abortion, or are you more opinionated about the morality of abortion?
When it comes to the legal aspect of abortion, I think it's very hard for me to say it shouldn't be legal, especially when I would say like gun ownership is legal and things that are in if you try to like take abortion and you abstract out just the service aspect of it or like the technology aspect of it, and the fact that there exists cases where I think everybody feels it's moral to be utilized, it seems very difficult for me to argue against its legality, like full legality. In terms of maybe the morality of it or how that would impact the way we talk about abortion, I'm very against abortion as like a. This is maybe, I'm not sure how common this is, but I've seen a little bit of this online, and some of this is where I would say I'd push back really strongly. Is I don't like abortion almost like as a cultural thing where some people are pushing for abortion almost as as a means to not take responsibility or as like post form or post intercourse like contraception almost, and I think that's not, I'm not very for that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Let me think about that. So, do you think people have a moral obligation to? Are you saying that abortion is bad, or are you saying that it's morally wrong?
So the way I would say it is depending on how depending on how you arrive at
Well,
whether or not.
first of all, do you appreciate a distinction between badness and wrongness?
Yeah, sure. I would say wrongness is where you're like unable to justify something, and then badness sounds more like a feeling of like this is just morally like when I say morally, I mean like it feels like it's something you
Yeah, I
feel
don't think there's a
negatively
deeper
about.
depth. Sure. Okay. So, yeah, badness. When I asked that question, I meant that I'm thinking of badness as just a very raw moral concept that can't really be defined in any way except by describing it as the opposite of good. So, you say something's bad, it's because it's something that's not good. Um, I think this is one of those categories that we know based on examples, not based on a stipulative definition. Um, so so there are things that could be good without being things that you have obligations to promote, and there can be things that are bad without being things that you have obligations to prevent. And wrongness is a little bit of a more complex idea because wrongness refers to actions that one has a moral obligation not to do. So usually moral philosophers, when they distinguish between these two things, they think of wrong actions as a class of things that are very bad, that lead to very bad consequences, that do that to such a degree that it creates an obligation. But they usually don't think that merely by creating some bad consequences or some good consequences, a thing could ever become obligatory. So anyway, all that preamble um, is just to ask you, when I say, do you think abortion is morally bad as opposed to wrong? Do you think it's one of those things that's just, it has bad consequences, but one does not violate an obligation by failing to bring a pregnancy to term? Or do you think a person is guilty of violating a moral obligation when they do that?
Yeah, sure. So I think of abortion much more neutrally than I would say like bad in the feeling bad sense. I kind of, as I mentioned earlier, I kind of have an analogy towards like say gun ownership, in the sense that like if you purchase a gun, that I don't think that in itself is bad. I don't think having a gun is bad, but the way you use that gun.
So you think abortion is morally neutral? That's okay. And you think that the context. So you're saying that there's a. Have you ever heard of the idea prima facie? That
No, what is
term.
that?
So prima facie is just means presumptive, and it's contrasted with strict or conclusive. So when philosophers say someone has a conclusive right to do X, what they're saying is there's no exception; it's absolute. When they say someone has a prima facie right to do X or to not have to do something, then they're saying that all other things being held equal, there's a presumption in favor of them being allowed to do X, which some further principle would have to override in some special case. So, what I think you're suggesting is that in general, across most contexts, abortion is the kind of thing that you can do. It's morally neutral, and in the absence of special circumstances that create like unusually harmful consequences, then you think that it's prima facie morally justified. So
That's not
when you say it's
necessarily the
neutral,
case. That's not necessarily the case. I
no,
mean more
okay,
so like okay. Let me present you one of the things that I chatted about with the other person in terms of hypothetical systems in which abortion could be manifested
well,
in, like,
hold
say,
on,
the
I
United
lost you
States.
for a sec there.
Oh, sorry. I said,
You
let
say
me present you one of the examples that I chatted with the other person about, and maybe this can give you a little
okay.
bit of why I don't necessarily think abortion should be I think you said prima facie as morally, like you should be allowed to do it unless some sort of circumstance overwrites that. I could imagine, and I wouldn't be at least immediately against a system where, say, abortion is legal, but in order to get an abortion without further consequence, you would have to first, say, I don't know, like
Okay, I'm
make a
very
request.
sorry. Can you back up 30 seconds and say all of that again?
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
to change my Wi-Fi to a different connection. Yeah, okay.
No worries. So here's an example that I talked with the other person about when it comes to abortion, which is sort of an example of how a system could function, like in the United States, which I think would not be considered prima facie, but it would still be, I would still look at abortion in that context as in isolation neutral. So I could not immediately, at least, find anything wrong with a system like this, which is abortion is legal. However, in order to get an abortion legally, you would need to beforehand sort of reserve a right in some way to get that abortion. Perhaps, and when I was thinking about this earlier with the other person, one of the big things that it came down to was an issue of like responsibility. So if, for example, a couple engaged in very irresponsible sex, they didn't purchase a condom, they didn't they weren't really thinking through like their finances or whatever, right? And then they just decided to have sex, and then one of the female partner got pregnant. In this sort of situation, I would be in favor of saying that would be you could judge that sort of situation as not morally okay and also not legally even okay to get an abortion. I'd be probably okay with both of those cases. But say, for example, a couple engaged in sex, but then maybe the condom broke. I would be in favor of, if the couple found that the condom broke, and then they said, hey, we might need to get an abortion. Here's some evidence showing that this is what happened. We were totally safe. We were totally considering all the things. This should be something we should be allowed to pursue in case we need it. And then they reserve that right. I think I would be mostly in favor of that sort of system. But in this case, because the responsibility falls on the couple themselves to actually get the right to do it. I don't think that that's the same as what you were saying earlier about prima facie, which sounds like as long as the circumstance, without anything happening, they should be allowed to get an abortion.
So I take it you believe that in many cases, maybe most cases, abortion is morally wrong because because pregnancy is a foreseeable consequence of consensual intercourse, and most unwanted pregnancies, I think you reason, must be cases where someone created a reasonable standard risk of having a child, and then because they had this unborn person, the same special obligations that characterize a normal mother-child bond have to characterize the mother's relationship with the developing fetus. Is that the idea? You're saying that moral responsibility, because because it's a preventable outcome by reasonably available options for a couple to not have a child, there's a special responsibility that a person is expected to bear when they have children under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's probably not most cases, because...
So that's what you think?
Yeah,
or cases
absolutely.
where everything I said does describe it. So how? Okay.
So
Well,
I don't think
I
it's
guess
actually
I'd like
most
to begin.
cases, though, because...
Right. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think it's most cases.
Why is that?
Oops, sorry. I don't think it's most cases because, contraception isn't that hard to get a hold of, and I know there's, say, if you're looking at maybe lower income areas that have a little bit more difficulty, not a little bit, it can be even tremendously more difficulty getting contraception. I believe there are a lot of movements in terms of trying to make contraception more available.
Okay, that sounds really implausible. I mean, you can buy a pack of condoms for $5 at a CVS. I'm assuming we're talking about the developed world, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about the developed world, but I can see, say, for example, okay, so I'm trying not to get super deep into
How poor do you think poor Americans are?
So, okay,
relative to buying condoms.
It's not that
Do you
they're
think
so
that's
poor
like
they
an
can't afford it,
unreasonable?
right? It's not that they're so poor
Okay,
they
well,
can't afford
do
it.
do you think they can't comfortably afford it?
It's not even that they can't comfortably afford it. It's that it's
Okay.
potentially the case that $5 in a weekly, your weekly expenditures is too much for you to want to do, and that you're willing to take the risk. That's like more so the issue here, right?
Okay, that's very unreasonable. I don't think that describes a $5 expense to prevent the prospective conception of a child is, I guarantee it, if you take the average uh, lowest quintile American household, you will find more than several $100s worth of non-essential spending just in their living room. Okay, it is absolutely possible for people to afford contraception that is, I guarantee it. If you look at expenses on entertainment and recreation, you would find more than $5, much more than $5 on a weekly basis to go toward that. Especially when you account for the fact that so much of the reason why people even become poor in the first place is because they don't do this exact thing. So I'm now, just to be clear, I don't actually believe the responsibility objection. I'm generally pro-choice, but I think your view commits you to a much more broad
Well, so the interesting thing
repudiation
is
of abortion than you think it does, because I think it's very implausible to say that there are very many Americans in those special circumstances you describe where it's unreasonable they're not reasonably expected to. Sorry, where it is the case that they do not have a reasonable availability of the option of preventing their pregnancies by way of contraception.
well, no, okay, so if you grant me that most people can get contraception, this is actually in favor of my point. I'm trying to account for cases like realistically speaking. I think a lot. This is totally like feeling. I don't have actual data on this, but my feeling is that most unwanted pregnancies are not coming from like people with more income. I feel most people that are getting unwanted pregnancies are probably in the lower income bracket, and I'm trying to offer
True.
like just in case this comes into contention. If I said, for example, I expect that most people can get contraception pretty easily, there could be some pushback that I would try to understand. But if you're granting me this, like, that's even better. That makes my point, I feel like, a lot easier. So let's assume then that.
Well, no, I'm just making the point that you hesitated from saying that so I said you believe that that people become responsible for carrying a pregnancy to term in a moral sense. That is to say, they have a moral obligation to carry the pregnancy to term, insofar as they find themselves in that situation based on consensual sex and based on having failed to avail themselves of reasonably available options in order to prevent the pregnancy.
Yes.
And then I said, okay, well, what about the availability of contraception? You said, yeah, I do think in such a situation, people would, in fact, be morally obligated to carry the pregnancy to term. But then you said, I only think that would create a moral obligation for a relatively small range of cases in the United States. And I asked you why, and then you said, well, because I think most people cannot reasonably afford contraception. And so
I think you misunderstood me. Let me try to rephrase
Okay.
the point, because I remember there was like a chunk in there where I was disconnecting. So
Okay.
for me, as I mentioned earlier, if a person uses contraception, that should remove them of the responsibility of, in case of an accident, like let's say they're using their contraception like sensibly and a condom breaks or
Yeah,
something.
if the contraception fails, then you don't think so. But you think that if contraception wasn't even used in the first place, I'm assuming then you think an unwanted pregnancy is morally obligated to be completed.
Yeah. So if
Okay.
a couple engages in irresponsible sex, that's what I would call irresponsible sex, given that they have, and this is kind of where I was talking about, potentially difficulties for people with lower income to be able to get a hold of condoms, or maybe be
Okay.
willing to get a hold of condoms. In the case where you are able to get contraception and you're using it properly, for me that that's good enough, essentially. I think maybe on the more conservative side, they would say like, casual sex is not like that doesn't exist or something like this, and that wouldn't be okay. That's not what I'm claiming, and and this is why I was pushing back on the most cases, because I think in most cases, it's not that people like engage responsibly in sex and then like, now they need an abortion or something like this. I think in most cases it more like it feels more right. I have no data on this again, but it feels more right to say that cases where an abortion eventually is needed is due to yeah, just to repeat it, I think the reason why I was pushing back on the most cases is I think in most cases where an abortion is needed, I don't think that comes from people who are engaging in responsible sex, and more likely it comes from people engaging at least I feel, again, I don't have data like actual studies or statistics on this. If we really want to, I can try to pull them up, but my intuition would tell me that...
I'm sorry, you think most of the unwanted pregnancies that are subject to abortions in the United States are the result of responsible sex? That's your position?
No, they're not.
Okay, so you think abortion in the United States in most cases is not justified because it's actually happens due to irresponsible sex?
No, I'm saying most cases where you would want an abortion, so not like actually an abortion occurs, but in a case where somebody becomes pregnant, and if you went up to them and asked them, hey, if an abortion was free and I snapped my fingers and it happened, would you want it? I think most of the cases where the person would say yes, that comes from situations where it's not responsible. So the reason why I say that is because I think most people who engage in responsible sex, and I trust that, I trust the technology of contraception, for example, I trust like Plan B, I trust that this, these products work as intended, that should eliminate almost all of the cases where an irresponsible engagement with sex actually leads to an unwanted pregnancy.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing that I'm glad that I drew some of that out of you, because I feel like the first disagreement we have is really whether one's responsibility for the pregnancy actually matters to whether it's morally obligatory to have the child. It's like, I don't know, what have you, I don't know how much of like the traditional arguments for the pro-choice view you've heard, but one of them is the famous Violinist case. Have you heard of this before?
I don't think so.
Okay, so the idea is you've been hooked up to a stranger while you're unawares, and you wake up and you find that there's these medical lines that attach you to the other person, and they require your kidney for 9 months, say, in order to live. And the question is, do you have a moral responsibility to maintain the connection, or can you unplug and allow the person to die on the basis of your bodily freedom and self-ownership?
So, wait, sorry. So how did you end up in the situation? You just like...
So yeah, so the hypothetical begins by, it's just we're not even going to account for responsibility. I'm just trying to test you at a baseline. So what do you think if you know nothing else about the situation? What do you think? Do you have a right to unplug, or?
Well, if I knew nothing else, then I would give a conditional right to unplug. If you...
Okay.
Yeah, if you have no obligation to stay there, then yeah, you should just be able to like get up and leave. Of course.
Okay, so now imagine that you're in the same situation, but it's your child. Do you still feel the same way?
So if it's your child and you're still like obligated to help your child grow, then yeah, you would have some moral obligation to
that's what we're testing with. So yeah, when I ask you that, like, you shouldn't presuppose that there's an obligation. You should just, I don't want to know that if there is an obligation, then you should. I want to know.
No, because it depends, right? This depends again. Like, so if you're in a society where, say, for example, I don't know, the way that children are raised is not like a single parent to a single child, then I would say your obligation in that situation is much less. But if your obligation is like if you're in this sort of nuclear family type of situation where like you as a parent are solely responsible for your kid and you're like super responsible for making sure that they grow up healthy and strong and stuff like this, then I would say that the obligation is much stronger, yeah, to like stay on the table. Sorry.
That already seems to me like a view that most pro-choice, I don't even think most pro-life people would agree with that. That sounds like a very extreme concession.
I mean, I don't think I'm pro-life, so maybe you can extrapolate a little bit more. I'm not sure what the concession is.
Sorry, I lost you again.
So I said, I'm not pro-life, so
Okay.
I don't think that. I'm not sure where the parallel is. If you could maybe elucidate a little bit better about like the maybe what you think is like contradictory in sentiment or something like this, it would help me out a lot. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't say it was contradictory. I just said it sounds like an extreme implication of your view.
Or maybe I should say like I said contradictory in sentiment because you said it feels like a concession towards the pro-life case, but I don't see myself as pro-life.
No,
so
I wasn't saying that. I was saying it's a argument for a pro-life position that's more extreme than the arguments most pro-life people would make for their view. That's what I was saying.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Do you feel like I'm pro-life?
Not in general, but I mean, you are making a case that a lot of what you're saying, I mean, the position that you have a moral obligation to carry a pregnancy to term is a pro-life view.
But it's conditional, I think. I think that's where the difference is.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think the pro-life view it necessarily refers to one unconditional support. Most people who are pro-life for like actually acknowledge exceptions. They're not absolutists. So like most people who are pro-life say that in cases of rape, for example.
Yeah, but I think most pro-life people, okay, sorry, I should say the conditional is a lot weaker. I think most pro-life people are like against the notion of casual sex, for example.
Right, okay.
And I totally am not against casual sex. I'm against irresponsible casual sex, or what I'm defining as irresponsible here, yeah.
Okay, let me read you a scenario.
Okay.
And you tell me what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So, imagine that you voluntarily decide to coat the interior of your home with a dangerous brand of paint that has the foreseeable consequence of causing a fatal kidney ailment to your infant son, which will make him require blood transfusions from yourself.
Okay.
Your son consequently develops the ailment and is in need of a blood transfusion. You wake up and you find that you've been kidnapped and hooked up to his circulatory system. He will fully recover in 9 months so long as you do not prematurely disconnect. Do you have a moral obligation to maintain the line for 9 months?
Did you know that the paint would cause the condition?
You knew that it was a possibility.
With what likelihood?
The same likelihood that that you had the same level of certainty and foreseeability as one has in having sex in the way that you described would create a moral obligation.
Oh, absolutely, you would be obligated to stay on the table then, because the probability of getting because the probability of getting pregnant with irresponsible sex, like if you're not using contraception and you're not using Plan B and you're not using like most of the things that would, most people would say like you should do this if you're going to have casual sex, the chances of getting pregnant are what, like 20% or something at least, right? So I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, absolutely. If you knew there was a 20% chance that your kid was going to develop like a severe blood disease that would require transfusion like this, and you did it anyways, yeah, like I think that.
And you have to spend 9 months on the table, and you can't leave.
Yes, because you are potentially causing the death of somebody else. in a very negligent manner, in what I would consider to be a very, very negligent manner, if you were aware of the risks before going into it. And it's like a reasonable expectation that you're aware of the risks, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it just sounds real. My intuitions are divergent with the ones that you're expressing, and I think most people's are,
Oh,
because I
can you
just don't think it's
explain like
plausible that.
can you explain your intuition or what you think most people's intuitions are?
Yeah, I don't think it's plausible to say that you would have a moral obligation under those circumstances to stay connected for 9 months, because I think people believe that you have a right to bodily autonomy that overrides whatever you might think counts in favor of staying, and that it's an unreasonable demand on your bodily autonomy to be hooked up to this person for such a period of time. So you're not morally obligated. It might be a nice thing to do or a good thing to do, but you're not morally obligated to maintain the connection. Now that's compatible with saying that you also have a moral obligation not to put your child in that situation. But I'm just making the point that I don't believe that you have an obligation, even if you did, to be connected.
So here's like a follow-up question then. So let's say you knew the risks that this was happening. It's like, don't do this, otherwise your kids are going to develop these blood diseases on the jar or whatever like this. And then you did paint this thing. And then let's say the police found out. Do you think that the police, like if you were brought to trial, I guess, in that trial, do you think that the parent in this case would be found like guilty, I guess, for reckless endangerment of their kid and potentially be forced to serve jail time?
Yeah, so they that's exactly what I just said, right? Like they'd be guilty for a lot of things, but they wouldn't be guilty of, or they wouldn't be legally compelled to maintain the connection. And I don't think anyone would think they had a moral obligation to
Or
maintain
I'm
the
trying to
connection
get
for
you
9 months.
on
So
the
what they would
autonomy
say is,
part.
yeah. So I think yeah, like you would be expected to face consequences for the moral wrong of harming the child and for putting it in that situation. But crucially, I don't think that you would be morally obligated to maintain the connection. There's actually a legal case where something similar was looked at. I don't remember the name. It was Shimp versus someone. You can look it up. Where a cousin sued his other hit. One person sued his cousin um, because he was the only organ match for his bone marrow, and he tried to compel him legally to submit samples of his blood marrow in order to allow for in order to support his bodily vital functions during some surgery that was life saving. And as a result, the person died. And the courts found that he did not have a moral obligation or a legal obligation uh, to submit bodily tissue, even though it would have prevented this person's death. Now, we have to imagine, obviously, but I think even if that person was in that situation because of his cousin, I don't think even then people would think this person is obligated to donate an organ to the other person, or and I don't think law in our country would require that person to submit an organ to the other person because we have this strong presumption in favor of bodily autonomy.
So maybe I'm understanding bodily autonomy wrong, because I could totally see a case where, let's say, like the paint case, or maybe if the person was responsible for putting his cousin in that position, that they could be sentenced to like 9 months in jail. And in which case, like 9 months in jail is, essentially you're losing your bodily autonomy. So this is kind of why I asked you, like, do you feel like they would be found guilty and like it would be okay for them to be sentenced to serve time? And if you feel like the answer is no, that they shouldn't be potentially sent to serve time, then that would be consistent with what you're saying. But I feel like the answer is it would seem reasonable if like an extremely negligent mother was sent to jail, potentially for 9 months, and in which case, the thing that would be confusing for me then is like, what do you mean by bodily autonomy? That seems a little bit different in terms of not being able to move, which would be very similar to being put to jail, or something related to maybe like removing a body part or something like that. That seems, I mean, there's definitely a nuance there. Maybe I'm not seeing so clearly.
Yeah, so bodily autonomy is the freedom of a person to use their body in the ways they desire to use it. And I acknowledge that a penalty of jail time constitutes a violation of bodily autonomy. But I also think you think that there's a distinction between a court sentencing someone to a period of 9 months jail time and a court compelling a person to donate an organ to someone else in order to save their life, for example. So, like, just imagine, so this is why I questioned what the relevance of your asking me, well, do you think that person would serve jail time? Because it doesn't sound analogous to saying that person has an obligation to stay connected, even if they created the situation. And the reason is, just imagine if the court sentenced the person to 9 months jail time plus every day they have to donate some tissue to another person.
Ah, I see.
Do you
I
think,
see. Okay. Okay.
does that seem like the kind of thing that that would be a good policy in the United States?
I think I understand the difference now. So I would say in that case, I would not be in favor of the person like being forced to donate tissue, but they would be forced to like donate something equivalent. So it could be like monetarily equivalent, or it could be I don't know, like what other equivalent thing would be, like time equivalent, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, I don't, nothing I've said commits me to saying people don't have a moral or a legal expectation to compensate the damages to victims of intentionally perpetrated harm. So that's fine with me.
Oh, yeah,
But I still,
sure.
what you've said so far, though, I don't think justifies your strong view that people have a moral obligation to maintain the pregnancy all the way till the end of the of term.
Well, so okay, so here's a question then. So if it's the case that a person doesn't, let's say they engage in irresponsible sex and then they don't carry the pregnancy to term, how would you, do you feel like there's any like moral wrong done to potentially the person that's like the potential fetus, I guess, in this case?
Let's see. Is there a moral wrong done to the child? I think it's something that's definitely bad. I mean, you're causing suffering if the child can feel pain at whatever point in the pregnancy, and so that might be a reason to think it's bad. But whether it's a wrong, well, it can only be wrong if it creates a moral obligation. That's why I thought it was important that I define that at the beginning. So no, I don't think any wrong is done to the child. Um,
Or okay, so but you feel that it would be bad, I guess, right?
sure, it's something that you, all other things held equal, would want to have less of in a society is unwanted pregnancies.
Right. And then so here's the follow-up question
The
to
main
this.
reason why that's bad, though, is because of, I think, the effects on the mother. I'm not persuaded that abortion is murder, so um, I guess the main reason is because it's a sign. Having a high number of adolescent pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies in a country is usually an indicator of many other healthcare outcomes that are poor and a lot of social dysfunction. And so, on the grounds that it creates a lot of harmful consequences to just have many people who are having children out of wedlock or outside of a stable family structure, and many people who are becoming pregnant and then having to go through a very difficult period of reckoning about what to do about that situation, both of those things are undesirable outcomes, and I'd want to, if there are, like I said, all other things held equal, and if there's some policy that can make that happen less often, that doesn't infringe people's rights or create negative consequences of its own, then I would support such a policy.
Okay, so I think that the thing I was trying to get here was like, in the case where you're doing wrong to something, so it sounds like you don't consider like the potential child a human being, and in which case like this wouldn't hold. But maybe I would adjust. So if I'm aware of like all the possibilities here, then maybe I would adjust to say the following, which is, in cases where you are able to make an equivalent payment, I would be in favor of not violating what I understand from this conversation to be like, was it bodily autonomy? But in a situation where no other like, for example, with the child, right? If you have a child and then you dispose of the child, whether you call that killing or not, it seems, if you cared about the child as a person, you can't actually pay that child back in any way. And in this sort of situation, and I would argue in the case with the blood transfusion thing, if you were responsible for putting your child in that case and there was no other way, like you couldn't pay for somebody else to come in and like take your spot or something like that, you're the last possible reasonable outcome, then I would be in favor of forcing the person to stay on the table. And I think that probably extends to my position on like abortion as well. It's like the reason why I feel if you're like super irresponsibly reaching a state of pregnancy, then it feels like it feels like the fault is on the people that engage in the irresponsible sex, and there doesn't seem to be any method, I guess, that would seem like, even if I'm thinking through it now as we're talking, I can't really think of anything that would it seems like some bad is done. I would agree that I'm not sure if I would consider it wrong, but it does seem like some bad is done, and it seems that there's just like no consequence, and that's where it kind of like doesn't sit right with me, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you think so now you're saying, it sounds like you're saying there's no wrong that's done. Is that right? You don't think anyone has a moral obligation
I'm
to
not
carry a pregnancy
sure
to
if I would
term?
say it's wrong, but I for sure would say it's bad.
Okay. Well, that's progress, because earlier you were saying that you were pretty strongly maintaining that it was wrong. So if you don't think it's wrong,
if I said that, I'm pretty sure it was because I mistook your you mistook your distinction between wrong and bad. Yeah.
right. Well, okay. Just to be clear, bad is something that's not good, that you want to have less of, all things held equal. But then wrong is something that one is morally obligated not
like
to
an
do.
obligation, yeah. For me, it's like very close to wrong, but I'm not confidently like. It's super hard for me to say confidently that by itself it is for sure
what
wrong.
I think you're saying is, you think, so usually when people say something's good, they're saying it's like it's a praiseworthy thing to do. Something's bad, it's a condemnation-worthy thing to do.
Sure.
So you want to say that it's a very morally unpraiseworthy thing to do, that it's something that might merit social sanctions and shame, but you don't think that it's the kind of thing that rises to the level of an obligation. It's not something that one is committing a wrong to have done.
Yeah, like
and what you're saying is you feel like it's unfair, or there's like something missing in a moral sense for our society to not have punishments associated with reckless, irresponsible sex, given the fact that it prospectively results in pregnancies that will then be terminated by abortion.
Yeah, punishment in quotes for sure.
So you want some kind of negative consequence to be attached to it, and you think
not
that
so much negative.
There's something wrong with a. do you think that that it's over permissive or unhealthy or morally grotesque for a society to just allow irresponsible, reckless sex and abortion as though none of this has any moral weight at all and it's not very important? Do you think
I would
people
say
is
there's
what concerns you the fact that people don't spend enough time reckoning about the problem or thinking that it's or feeling morally at pains when they have abortions? Is that your concern?
So I would say in the case where you like go to the limit and you have like just totally reckless sex and there's no like nothing, that would for sure be a wrong to me. And the reason why I think that that would be a wrong, like I think in expectation this would for sure hit the like threshold that I would say this is wrong, is that there would be so likely so many kids that are not being brought up properly. I don't think that at least in our current like society, the way that like children are raised, I don't think that that would be at all fair for a very like large number of at that point I would say they're people, and because of that, that for sure seems like a wrong to me. The issue is where the line is drawn. And this is kind of why in the system that I was presented, like the hypothetical system I was presenting, there would need to be sort of an argument in terms of reserving the right for an abortion. And I think that that argument would be, it would make sense to me to draw that argument where like responsibility falls, if that's like clear. In terms, wait, let me think. Yeah, like I think that that would make
Are you
sense.
talking about a legal right or a moral right?
So it would be a legal right backed by moral like moral comprehension.
Yeah. Okay. So are you saying hypothetically like our best society would be one where abortion was in cases of irresponsible sex legally disallowed? Is that what you're saying, or?
No, what I'm saying is that you would have to argue whether or not it is or isn't legal, or sorry, is or isn't responsible. And if it
So
qualifies as irresponsible,
okay.
then for sure I think that you have. So this is where it's hard, right? If it's obligation or not obligation. I think in this case you're obligated to carry the child out. Yeah, because
Okay, this is confusing because we've had at multiple points in this conversation, I've tried to address many of the points that the sentiments you just expressed, and you have at some times kind of disavowed some of those ideas, like saying it's morally obligatory, or in fact, at the very beginning, you've even said you made you generally approved of the legality of abortion, and you said we were
I
going to
still
talk
agree
about
with
the
that.
morality of abortion. Okay, so now you're saying, well, I don't know that you are though, because you're saying that ideally a society would have this like where a person would be expected whenever they wanted an abortion to produce evidence in a to an institution like a court. I'm assuming. Um, so you have sex, then you want an abortion, you appear in court, and then you produce evidence that this was a result of failed contraception or some kind of unreasonable or something that was not reasonably preventable. And
No,
then
no,
if
no, no, no. Wait.
only
So
if you can
I
do
think
that,
the
then you
reason
go
why
out.
you're getting confused a little bit is because you might be confusing what I'm saying as like a hypothetical as an example versus what I'm saying is like what I think is should be the hard like yeses that I would want in society. So for sure I would want abortion to be legal. But
Yeah.
I think that legal abortion should not just be like, open like season, you can just get an abortion whenever you want. A
Okay.
hypothetical way that you could make sure abortion is not treated flippantly is to have a system where maybe court is a little bit too strong here, but you could have a system where somebody has to produce some sort of argument to show that you did engage in responsible sex. It is not. This is not like I've thought through the system 100% and I'm like, this is absolutely what I would want. This is just an example that could be implemented just to think through like the moral aspects of this. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a number of things to say about it. I mean, one is we probably disagree on whether the responsibility objection to the morality of abortion and the legality of abortion works. I disagree in both cases. I think that responsibility does not, or yeah, I'm just going to call it the responsibility objection. I don't think shows that what you want to show in terms of uh, making it so that it would be advisable to not legally allow abortion. And I also think it doesn't really show that we have a moral obligation not to have abortions. So then it seems to me, and I'm pretty sure at different points while we were talking, you agreed with both of those claims. That's why I'm a little confused about why you would then make it so that there was this condition on getting to have abortions where one has to produce evidence in order to justify on a case by case basis whether they have an abortion.
So you said I object to. Wait, so you said I objected
What
to
you
which two?
what you've said, the system you're describing amounts to a legal amounts to a law against abortion, right? I mean, I'm
I
assuming
wouldn't
in
say
cases
so.
where when people aren't able to produce evidence in order to satisfy whatever administrative body is making these decisions, that they were not having reckless sex, then it seems like in those cases they would be expected to not have the abortion, right?
I mean, it doesn't have to be a legally enforced system. So again, the system is a hypothetical way that this could work. I'm not saying that this is like necessarily what I'd want, but the system is a method for which we can
So the
analyze the
system's
morals
not
of it. I'm not saying like this is like we should
it's not
implement
backed
this.
by force.
No.
So if I don't show up
It's not.
to
Wait. It's not even an issue of force. It's an issue of like. So in such a system, there is
okay.
there is a need for the people that would like to get an abortion to think retrospectively, and I guess not just retrospectively, but before they engage in sex, to think proactively, or whatever the opposite of retrospectively is, to think ahead of time in terms of whether or not the way that they're engaging in sex is reasonable. That's what I would want, right? So this is like to qualify my statement that I'm not pro-abortion in like a cultural sense, in that if you accept abortion in a way where there are no like even cultural implications on it, then it feels like the system would be abused, or not the system, but the like ability to get an abortion would be abused in ways that you wouldn't want it to be abused. You wouldn't want it to be like utilized in that manner, I guess.
Okay, so the purpose of the institution that you're describing here would be purely to require people to make an account, to produce an account of how they got in their situation, to consider how it could have been averted, and then they get the abortion. So it's purely like a slap on the wrist, just a way of encouraging reflection on why this wasn't a thing to do, and why they should have availed themselves of all of the preventative measures of finding themselves in that situation. And then after, and the idea is by doing this, you could promote more responsible use of contraception. Is that the idea?
So
And you could kind of stigmatize reckless sex.
I mean, so if that's effective in reducing the amount of abortion that's I would consider to be immoral, then yeah, that would be enough. If it's not, then other systems could be implemented to try and do this. But the idea that there should be some like thing that happens in which people have to be aware of like what they're getting into, and the responsibility, to me, I think is a really important part of this. That's the part that I'm trying to get at with the example.
Yeah, so one complaint I have is just that there's this assumption that people don't already go through a similar process of reckoning when they have abortions, and that they need an institution to tell them to do that. But I think that's totally unrealistic. If
No,
you
no, no,
look
no,
at
not when they have
the
abortion.
typical person's
Wait, not when they have an
experience
abortion.
of, sure, when they have unwanted pregnancies, or
No, no, no. It's when they have sex, right? So again,
Oh,
like
okay,
if we're
wait.
going back to like the hypotheticals that you had given me, if there's like if there's a case where there's like a 20% chance, or I don't know what the like sex on like sex without contraception to like pregnancy rate is, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm just going to guess 20%. If there's a 20% chance that something like this like is possible, then absolutely I think that the person should be responsible to think about the consequences before they engage in it.
Okay, so when you have sex, so how many, so like every time you have sex or like once a week? Like how does this work?
Well, every time you have sex and you don't want to have a child, right?
You would have to appear in front of a institution
No, 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 no.
in order
Sorry,
to,
sorry. The institution is a hypothetical. So if you watch back
yeah.
like the VOD or whatever, or you can watch actually my conversation with Sir Warmups. I'm not trying to suggest this institution as the solution. That's not what I'm doing. But the
Okay.
solution gives a framework by which you can analyze the morality of things within a more rigid, like there's more rigid gears and stuff. If we don't have any concept of how something would work, then it's just fully just like, do I feel good or feel bad? And then you have to make this huge jump. That's the issue. So that
Okay.
you don't have to call it a system. You could say it could be like a
I
cultural
I
system.
mean,
You could have a
I
legal
what
system,
you're
whatever.
basically describing is sex education, right? Like,
If that works, if that's enough, then yeah, absolutely, that would be like enough. But it seems to be the case, in terms of how like contentious abortion is in the United States, that isn't enough, right?
right. Okay, well, we played that out. So do you have another topic you're interested in? I mean, I don't think there's any further thing we disagree about that we haven't already explored,
Actually, I was going to ask you this.
unless there's something else.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this.
Okay.
So you said that there were two objections. You felt like you wouldn't want to entertain these two objections, regarding responsibility, and then you said something about like sorry, like there was a section where you said something about like these two objections, and I was hoping to hear more how you were going to argue through that, and I didn't really like hear the like explanation for it. Can you maybe go through that section again?
Let me think. Well,
You,
what I described as the responsibility objection to the pro-choice view is basically the argument that you have an obligation to carry a pregnancy to term because it's something that you could have prevented by reasonable effort on your part.
oh, I see.
And
So,
so what they say is your response. So you have because this is a situation that you created. Then there's some special. That's like a piece of context that might change our uh, moral evaluation of the situation of having an unwanted pregnancy.
but
Um, than if we didn't know that piece of information.
is this contingent on not believing or not valuing like potential, I don't know what the right word here, like the fetus, I guess. Is this contingent on the fetus not being evaluated as a human being?
No, so the advantage of the argument that I gave at the beginning, which is the blood transfusion situation, is that it just bypasses all of the arguments about the personhood of the fetus because um, it asks us to imagine, well, even if it was a fetus, or sorry, even if it was a person, um, there are other situations that are comparable where we wouldn't expect someone to violate their bodily autonomy in the relevant ways, um, namely in a way that's comparable to carrying a pregnancy to term. And so then you presented the responsibility objection where you said, well, what if you were the one who created the blood transfusion like scenario in the first place? And then I turned it back to you and said, well, just imagine that that's true. Would you indeed have this moral obligation to stay connected to this person? And if your intuitions are like mine and like most people who hear that scenario, what you would probably say is, well, I think it's wrong to put someone in a situation like that, but I also think that it would be wrong to force a person to stay in that situation in order to compensate the harm. They might be able to compensate in another way, but if the person dies, they're not expected to give up any part of their body for the same reason that you're not expected to amputate your fingers to compensate someone if that, for, say you cut off someone's hand. Generally, we don't believe in the eye for an eye principle in our society, so we don't think people have to compensate in kind. We think they have to compensate in degree.
So I feel like you're
So
smoothing out a bunch of parts there,
yeah,
though, right? Like, and this is kind of where
okay,
the question comes up. So I said, I think I adjusted my position earlier to say, like, in a case where like life is threatened, something that's like irreparably, like you just cannot, you can't like get around it in any way, which I think the hypothetical you brought up is the case where like your child would die. In that sort of situation, and just to tie this back to the rejection of the responsibility of wait, hold on, the rejection of the responsibility objection. So I think most people in society also feel that if you do wrong to somebody and you're responsible for that wrong, that you're obligated to like repay in some. There should be some sort of repayment, right? I feel like this is the case.
yeah,
The reason why I asked you if you felt that your position is contingent on not feeling that the fetus is a human is because if you did feel it was a human and you got rid of it, there's no way, like there's no ability for the person that engaged in the abortion to pay back the other party because now they're just gone. And
that's right.
and that's like, to me, that's where it feels like a little bit wrong, I guess, is that, and where I would
Yeah,
push back on the rejection of the responsibility objection.
yeah, okay. So the argument is because you wouldn't be able to compensate the damage. You wouldn't be able to compensate and pay damages to the victim of your act. Then you're not relieved of responsibility, even if that comes at the cost of your bodily autonomy. Um,
Yeah, there's just no, like, it's so
I
severe.
disagree with
There's
it
nothing
because you
can
have
do.
to just imagine the blood transfusion situation again. So, imagine there's a 20% probability that that a random stranger will find themselves fatally suffering organ failure by walking by your house because you used some horrible, noxious paint when you constructed your home. Okay, imagine that's true, and then imagine that somebody kidnaps you when this person, sorry, someone kidnaps you. You wake up and you find yourself on an operating table, and you're hooked up to this other person who is, lo and behold, one of the people who walked by your home and developed a renal disease. Okay, and then we have to imagine that because this person will die if you don't stay on the line for 9 months, that therefore, because, and let's say he doesn't have a family to send money to or anything like that, then you have to stay on the line because otherwise the guy isn't compensated for the harm.
Well,
In
it's not
that
just the
case,
person isn't
most of us think, yeah, okay.
oh, sorry. It's not just that the person isn't compensated for the harm. This is where I think the eye for an eye. I don't think I'm breaking eye for an eye here, like our rejection of eye for an eye, because in the case where you, like, let's say you, I don't know, hack off somebody's finger or something like that, right? You're not responsible for giving them back the finger because the thing that's at risk is a finger. But if it's the case where somebody's like life is in jeopardy, that's so much, I would say, stronger of a what's the right word here? The thing that's at, like, in contention is so much more big. I don't have the words here, but the thing is, like, so much more important that if there are no other there's no other way that you can compensate this other person, and their life is going to be forfeit if you even take for 1 second the needle out of your arm or something and you get off of the blood transfusion table, then morally speaking, I think you are obligated to sit on that table, yeah, for 9 months.
This is crazy. This is an insane view. I mean, what
Why
you're
is that
saying is
crazy?
like, well, just imagine the implications, okay? Like,
Okay.
let's say by amputating your right hand, let's say you punch someone really hard, okay?
Okay.
You were in a fist fight. You punched the other person. You started the fight because maybe they were trash talking you. It doesn't really matter. And this causes liver failure, okay? And for some reason, you can just think about it. Like the only way to help this person, because you're an organ match, is to have someone surgically remove your liver and give it to the other person. Do you think that it would be,
But
first
you're
of
not
all,
fully
legally
responsible
speaking,
in that case, though. This is where I would argue you're not fully responsible in this hypothetical, because punching
Why?
somebody in the liver, the probability that you're like going to cause liver failure to the degree where they would require a transplant, that doesn't seem like that's such a low
well, you
probability.
just have to, okay, so don't fight the hypothetical, okay? Imagine, let's take the hypothetical as given and assume there are not like relevant pieces of context that aren't stipulated if I
Yeah,
didn't
sure.
stipulate
Okay,
that,
if that's the
okay?
case,
So
like if it's
in
the
this,
case where
so let's imagine
knew,
it really is true. Yeah, let's say I know I happen to know that I'm an organ match to you because I'm your identical twin or something, okay?
Sure.
And we get into a fight and I punch you in the liver and I know I'm the only if your liver were to fail, I would be the one who would be able to supply the organ that you need.
and you also
Okay.
knew that
Do you think
punching me in
even
the
under
liver would like have a 50% chance of causing life-threatening liver failure.
Sure.
If that's the case,
say
yes,
that's a known
absolutely.
thing.
I think you're responsible for up to your life also being at risk to, you would also be like responsible in some way to help them. Maybe you would have to, I don't know, give cells to clone your liver or whatever, or, up to the point of your life also being
Okay,
at risk.
let's say you
Essentially, yeah.
can't. So let's say you can't clone your liver. So let's play this out. So what you're suggesting is that I would be morally obligated to submit myself to a surgery to have part of my liver removed, or to have my liver removed. Maybe we should say kidneys
Yeah, let's say
because
kidney. That might be a bit
you can
easier.
have we have this two kid. Yeah, okay. So we'll say to have a kidney removed. Okay. So do you think my first question is the harder one, which is legally speaking. Do you think there should be any enforcement there? Do you think the cops should come to me and if I resist, restrain me to an operating table and have my liver removed? And then secondly, do you think I have a moral obligation to do that?
So legally speaking, I think it would be very difficult to turn this into like something that would be applicable sensibly and like
Let's say we could. Okay, let's say we could, right?
if
Let's
we
say
could,
the cops would be able to come and get me and compel me to donate my organ.
right? So if we could, and well, okay, like it wouldn't be the cops though, right? You mean like you would be sentenced to do this, like that would, like it wouldn't just
Yeah,
be,
but if you
yeah.
resist,
Yeah,
okay,
sure,
but
sure.
if you
So like
if
you have the
refuse,
ability
then
to like defend yourself and do this stuff. And the
well,
policy.
no, well, hold on. Let's say you were sentenced, okay?
Mm-hmm.
How are laws enforced in our country ultimately?
Are you asking like so you get sentenced?
Yeah,
I think
right. And then
usually
if
you
you
get held in
refuse,
jail until
okay,
like you have some amount of time to try to like do a retrial and all this other stuff, and you can keep trying to.
yeah, and if
Yeah,
you fail to fulfill the conditions of the sentence, who do they
eventually
just
the
let
cops
you
will come
walk
to your house.
free,
Yeah,
or yeah? So eventually, so the whole system of laws is anchored by a non-voluntary
yeah.
coercive act, which is the police compel you. Okay, so that's what I meant when I said the police would put you on an operating table and restrain you and force you to submit to a surgery. based on the principles that you've been advocating for.
Yeah, sure. So if it was possible to implement this correctly, then I wouldn't be against it.
Okay.
It's hard for me to say if I'm kind of incapable right now of removing like my personal bias against a situation like this. I feel like, for example, I'd be very dubious that something like this could be implemented correctly, even if you had like some super AI computer that's like, fully checking every single detail of every single case somehow. It still feels like a little bit off, but yeah, I think like at surface, like my surface reaction in terms of thinking through it, like if it was perfectly implementable and like perfect to very, very high degrees, and also, you're not just immediately going to the cops and there's a process. Yeah, I feel like it would be okay. The second question about whether or not it's like morally okay, I think, yeah, for sure it'd be morally okay in this case. If you knew that there was a huge risk of endangering, say, your life or my life in a fist fight or something by hitting you in the kidney, and then like your kidney explodes, and I knew this going into this scuffle or whatever, then I think, yeah, that would be morally for sure my responsibility, or your responsibility. I don't know. I forgot which case we were going in.
Yeah, okay. Well, we disagree, but I don't actually think there's a more fundamental
What about like
like
guns?
case
Here's
that
like
I
a
could
question
pose
about
to you.
guns.
Okay.
So let's say you have a handgun, and you shoot somebody, and like so how does like the death sentence work for you? I guess this is like this. I'm trying to get to that, and I don't know if I'm able to
Okay.
construct a really good hypothetical here, right? The death sentence is legal in I don't know how many states. I don't know how many states, but I feel like quite a number of states. If you kill somebody, you murder somebody, somebody can be sentenced to death. Isn't that like kind of the same thing?
Yeah, so I don't support the death penalty.
Okay, sure.
I
Then,
think the
yeah.
death penalty um, rests on the retributive theory of justice, but I support the reparative theory of justice. So I think that a punishment is only morally called for insofar as it can have effects on incentives and consequences. But after that, I don't think that the suffering of criminals is inherently valuable. So I don't think that a penalty of death is insofar as it doesn't have advantages in terms of consequences or incentives on society, like by posing a deterrent. Um, I don't think it has. I don't think it has any. I don't think it's any better than life in prison without parole.
Okay, so
Do you believe in the retributive theory of justice? Do you think like
I've never even heard of
um,
it, but this is
well,
interesting.
okay, so retribution is the idea that
Yeah,
punishment
yeah,
for
yeah. Like,
punishment's
or sorry,
sake
I haven't heard of it
is
before. You just
valuable.
mentioned it.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, so the retributive theory of criminal punishment says that, well, consequences do matter, and and one of the reasons to punish people is to disincentivize crime, and to contain the sources of further threats to other people's lives by keeping people in penitentiaries. Um, there's a further justification for punishment, which is that, and in fact, we should increase people's sentences based on this further factor that weighs in favor of punishment, which is the inherent goodness of punishing criminals. Um, and so that's what's meant by retribution. It's like there's this idea that when someone does a moral wrong, they throw the cosmic scale of right and wrong out of balance, and only a punishment can restore it to justice. And I think it's a completely absurd and idea, and I think it's a vestige of Christian morality, um, but some people do believe it, I guess. So
So do you
probably most
feel?
American conservatives believe it.
Oh, okay, well that's interesting because I was gonna ask you like in an ideal society, then for you, do you feel that the like legal system should meet the morals of its people, or do you feel that the legal system should kind of be like, I don't know if there's a, I don't know what the phrase here would be, some sort of like elevated thing that you're just like aiming for the future or something? Because here's like, I was first going to ask you if you how many, like if we had a national vote on whether or not the death penalty should be allowed, how many, what percentage I guess would be in favor? And it sounds like what you're saying is maybe close to 50, since you said conservatives would be in favor of it.
Well, actually, the death penalty is very unpopular in the United States. So, let me just pull up. So, on the Gallup organization is tracking public opinion in the United States on the death penalty since 1937, and what I'm seeing here is right now. So, 2021, the latest polling results. Oh yeah, okay. It's pretty much 50-50 in terms of who supports and who disfavors the death penalty.
So the follow-up question would then be like, how would you, because in terms of like, I guess, analogizing the death penalty to earlier what we were talking about, like bodily autonomy, I feel like,
Oh, wait. But one thing I will say is 60% of Americans say life imprisonment is superior to the death penalty as a punishment, and only 36% say the death penalty is superior. So, and then 4% reported to pollsters that they had no opinion. So that's interesting. So yeah, many Americans think that the death penalty is morally justifiable in theory, but think that in practice it's not good.
it's not as good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess like just analogizing back to the autonomy stuff. My feeling is that the bodily autonomy stuff is kind of like like shades of the death penalty. Maybe would you grant me that? Like, do you feel that that would be a okay statement to make?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think killing somebody is somewhere toward the upper extreme of violations of bodily autonomy.
Right. So, because you said earlier you felt that most people would not be like they would be super against this sort of notion, but
Yeah.
just contrasting that with maybe sentiment on the death penalty being justifiable, I guess, and also with the fact that people feel, the that what you just mentioned, the statistic about like life in prison being better. Do you feel that the laws of a country should be, I'm not sure how to say this, but like idealized in a way where you think like, maybe you're thinking of like the theory of the retributive versus reparative, and you like have, done all the calculations. You're like, this is better than this one, and this is some sort of like ideal above the sentiment of the society. Do you feel like that's how you feel like law, like where you think the law should go, or do you feel it's more should be kind of like matching or like fitting to the sentiment of the society?
Okay, that's interesting. Well, if the question is, do I think that laws should be imposed in a society in a non-democratic way? It's not. I'm not sure that I think that that would be good because I'm not. I'd be hard pressed to think of some good alternative to a democratic process. But if you're asking me, do I think that the law should always be whatever it is that, in a moral sense, is it best for the laws to be whatever it is that people agree with? I would say, morally speaking, it's possible for democracies to choose really bad laws. So, I think if you, it just depends on how you ask me the question. If you're asking, do I think we should have a death penalty, even if 95% of society agrees with it, I would say no, we shouldn't, because it's morally wrong. and because it's not superior to the alternatives available. But if you're asking me, should we implement the laws that people want, as opposed to enforcing them upon people, then I would say, yeah, I'm generally pro-democracy.
I think more so what I'm asking is like, I mean, I feel like you kind of answered the question that I was asking, which is maybe in a society where, because you said like a democracy can form laws that are bad. Yeah, I agree, but I think that that's somewhat contingent on like the society, like the majority, sorry, not fully being educated or aware of like consequences. In a society where, say, you are like all of the people understand the implications of what you emit into law, do you feel that in this sort of situation, so this is kind of difficult, I guess. Basically, in this sort of example, the bad, like it can't be possible that there are bad laws, I guess. So maybe the answer would be no. Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking to myself into circles here. Do you think that yeah? Do you think like if we were to try to wrap up the abortion talk here, do you feel like it's like validatable or like reasonable that somebody could feel the way that I feel? Because I think when you said earlier that it's most people would disagree with the sentiment, I feel like it. I can't tell because the statistic is like people say 50% in favor of death penalty, but 60% or 66%.
Yeah, so I didn't say people were consistent. So I agree with you that it's very strange that there's plenty of people in the United States who think something like 50% of people in the United States who think the death penalty is morally acceptable, but presumably these people also think that like punishment by amputation is not acceptable. I think that those would be considered different things, but you make the interesting point that, well, they seem like they wouldn't have any obvious moral weight except in terms of bodily autonomy. Like, why would it be any more wrong to amputate your arm than to kill somebody? And if it's wrong to do one, why is it not wrong to do the other? I actually think that might be a strong argument against the death penalty, actually. If you're not in support of amputation as a form of punishment, and you believe that it's morally continuous with taking someone's life, then presumably you should also disfavor the death penalty on the same grounds. But I still would stand by what I said earlier, which is I think that I'm appealing to widely shared and uncontroversial moral intuitions when I say that I believe that most people, when they reflect on the question of whether someone should be compelled to provide an organ in order to compensate another person for as damages for a harm to that person, that they don't believe that people should have to do that.
Even in a case even in a case where there's no other possible method of reparation, and also the other person's life is at risk, like significantly at risk, and also your life is not significantly at risk. Even in this case, you would still be okay.
Yeah, I believe so. I think what I'm describing. I think what I'm describing is most likely to be the popular view. Now, I haven't done polls to ask, but I'm making an inference from the fact that, in general, people think that punishment by amputation is wrong, and people also seem to, in general, think that, like, the Hammurabi's code is wrong. They think the sentiment behind eye for an eye, or what's called the in-kind the principle, there's a principle of proportionality that says we should compensate people in degree, but there's this other principle of in-kind compensation, and most people think that's wrong too. Which is when you harm someone, you should pay them back in the same way. So like if you rape somebody, then you should be raped. Would be like an example of an in-kind punishment, as opposed to an in-degree punishment where you pay someone a certain amount of money that is thought to be proportional to the harms perpetrated to the victim.
Like, no, I'm in
So
favor
I know
of.
that for independent reasons, I know those two principles are thought to be pretty much consensus that those are bad things, and I'm making an inference from the popularity of those ideas the to the situation that I described in the blood transfusion hypothetical earlier.
To
But
like
you
the
might,
caveated
I'd be
one.
curious to know what you think about whether the popularity of your view even matters.
Well, so I think the popularity of my view kind of matters in context of like what I was just asking you about in terms of do you think like a legal system or even the morals behind the legal system should be fit to like the society's feelings. I really wonder, and I think this might just be like part of the mathematician in me doing this, is one thing that we are very good at is finding weird counterexamples when given a set of circumstances. And I feel like the sort of the hypothetical that you mentioned, if you describe like all of the aspects of it, I feel like it actually wouldn't be that surprising to see a lot of people, even a majority of people, agreeing with my position. In the case where you have no other, like I agree with as much as possible, it should be repayment in degree, not in kind. I agree 100%. So you take that out of the equation by saying there's no other possibility. I also agree with this eye for an eye, like again being against eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth thing. So you do that by again taking this out of the equation by saying that the one, it's not life-threatening to you, and two, the lack of you doing this is life-threatening for the other person. If you remove those two, and then you also add the premise that the person who created the situation is like fully aware of, like reasonably aware also, and fully aware of the risk that was posed, and this risk is significant. It seems really hard for me to also just say like, yeah, I don't think most people would say there's no like responsibility for repayment. You just like the guy just dies and then you go to jail or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could have a responsibility for something that you fail to uh, you can have a moral obligation that you fail to meet. So it could be that yes, you should compensate that person, but because they will die, you can't. And
But you
so
can,
then,
I guess, in this case, without endangering your own life.
yeah, so that's true. You can, except for the fact that the person's not around anymore to receive the compensation.
Oh, sorry. In this case, it's like you can by like giving your blood 9 months of blood transfusion or your kidney or something.
No, I know that you can, but or yeah, okay.
Because I think the thing that I'm like morally struggling with or
Yeah.
like my feelings feel bad here is kind of it's like, and going back to what you were saying about retributive versus reparative, if I try to fit this into that dichotomy, let's say the person dies because you fail to meet the moral obligation. The only person wronged in that case is like, I guess maybe you'd say like putting them into jail would make people be more aware of the risks or something. Maybe that would be so. Okay, never mind. No.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you would do is, yeah, so I would say you don't require the person to do the blood transfusion, but that doesn't mean you don't punish them. You still contain them in a prison, and you disincentivize the course of behavior that led to that situation happening by punishing very vigorously anyone who does it.
Right. But do you feel like it would be more reparative? I guess I don't know. Like 9 months in jail versus 9 months on the blood transfusion. Wouldn't it be like slightly more reparative to have the 9 months on the blood transfusion just because you actually save like you get to save another person's life? I guess.
Yeah, so that just depends on whether you're a consequentialist or not. I don't actually think it's relevant, even if it leads to better results, even if it would be more deterring. It'd be an even more successful deterrent to that crime to violate that person's bodily autonomy in order to, in the way you punish them. I don't think that therefore we ought to implement such a system. I mean, it would be like saying, well, we could torture people and give them the lash and disfigure people and mutilate people when they commit crimes, and that might have a better deterrent effect. But I actually think for other reasons you don't do that. Like, I think that people own their bodies and are entitled to a certain amount of dignity, and so there's restrictions on the kinds of punishment you can use.
No, I agree with that. I mean, like in this case, because the benefactor of your punishment would still be alive, that it is like kind of better in some sense. And you're kind of, I guess, like if you do go, what is this, consequentialist or utilitarian or whatever, right?
But so I agree. Let me just clarify, or I'll just I'll do the
Go
work
ahead, yeah.
for you. Yeah, so I agree that it is better in terms of results for the person to be punished in a way that ensures that the victim doesn't die. But I don't think that affords a moral justification for punishing them in that way, because it involves other actions that I think override the benefits, like violating that person's bodily autonomy.
Okay.
In the same way that, like, if you were going to punish someone by amputation or mutilation or whatever, like it's possible somehow that leads that um, that leads to better results for the victim, but it's not obvious to me that therefore you should punish a person in that way. I still think like, let me think, another way you could, like, let's say somehow the victim of a rape was going to, let's say you could somehow, I don't, leave it to your imagination, okay? We've been doing hypotheticals the whole time,
Sure,
so
yeah.
I'm assuming you don't have a problem with hypothetical
Yeah,
reasoning.
yeah.
So, so imagine a very contrived hypothetical where somehow, by raping someone, you could save the life of some person that person had raped in the past. Do you think that therefore we would have a moral justification to rape that person?
So, in the case where there is no other alternative, and that
Sure.
person in the past that you're trying to save the life of, like, is, their life is in danger, not in danger, like their
Sure.
life is going to be forfeit, I guess, if this person doesn't get raped, then yeah, I absolutely would be in favor of it. Because
So
like,
imagine that. I'll put it this way.
okay,
So I thought of how we could flesh it out so that it's something you can imagine. So somebody rapes someone, and this person has a sexually transmitted disease that will be fatal without an antidote, and that person has an antidote, but they're not willing to give it up. There's only one certain, but we happen to know this person would be really humiliated by being raped and traumatized psychologically. And so rape is something they're so afraid of, it would just break them psychologically if they suffered from that action. And we happen to know that it's probably, if we raped this person, it would be enough to get them to give up the antidote afterwards. They'd be so shaken that they would tell us what the lockbox combination is or the location of where it's buried. Okay, so in that situation, do you think that it would be morally permissible to rape the person for the benefit of the victim?
like as punishment, and the person hasn't been punished like already for raping the other person.
Well, I imagine you can punish them in alternative ways, but one of the ways you can punish them is by raping them and saving the life of the victim.
Or I meant like they haven't already served some sort of punishment for raping the other victim. That's what you're saying. Like this would be the like.
Well, no. Let's keep it the way I described it. So, but let's add that detail in because why not? So let's say there's multiple ways this person can be punished. They can be punished with jail time. They could be punished by exacting financial resources from them to the victim, but the victim's going to die.
Yeah.
Okay. Or they can be punished by raping them. Okay, those are the three options.
If the only way,
and if you rape them, the third way, if you rape them, then they will give up the antidote. So that's the really ridiculous hypothetical I'm going to pose to you.
right? So the issue is that the punishment for me doesn't. Sorry, excuse me. The punishment here for me feels like too indirect in some way, but if you somehow could guarantee that, like, one, the rape is controlled, like the rape punishment, sorry, is controlled in a way to be not more severe than the rape that was inflicted on the other person and the transmission of the sexual disease. And then two, that like this has a 100% chance of getting the antidote and there's 0% chance of getting the antidote in any other capacity. And also that the rape of the person that did the raping originally didn't endanger that person's life, then yeah, I would be in favor of that. But unfortunately,
okay,
there's like too many.
That was the scenario I gave you, but yeah.
Yeah, like unfortunately, it feels a little bit loaded because it's like it seems really hard to see those.
I
things
made all of those qualifications, but yeah.
No, I know, but like the qualifications kind of paint it, I think, in a way that makes it like really hard to connect. Like the punching in the liver one was a little bit, I feel like a little bit more direct in the sense that I know the actions, like the consequences of my actions inflict some exact like thing, and then I also know that the way that my bodily autonomy is being violated is like exactly congruent.
Yeah, so you just have to imagine you have a crystal ball and you look into the crystal ball and it tells you that there's a 100% chance that if I rape this person, they'll give up the location of the antidote.
And also there's a 0% chance that anything else would work. And also that the rape that is done as punishment is like at most as severe as the rape that was inflicted on the original person, right? Or equivalently severe. Yeah, if all of those things line up, then sure. Yeah, I would say I'd be in favor of it. But it's hard to like. What I'm saying is it's because these like the hypotheticals are so, like I'm trying to say like morally speaking yes, but. I could see why this would be.
Yeah,
really
I mean, I think even by acknowledging how like out there the hypothetical is, I still think what you're conceding is a pretty shocking concession. It's because it just sounds very morally implausible that someone could have that it could be morally permissible to rape someone in order to save another person's life.
Yeah,
I think
but
maybe
like,
it's plausible that you could be morally justified in raping one person to save like 100 people's lives or something like that. But I don't know if the benefit of just one person's life justifies it.
Yeah, but I think that
intuitions may vary. So
I think that like, so this is kind of what I said earlier, which is like I think if you just connect the dots like that, like the end and the start like this, and you leave out the conditionals or the constraints, and yeah, of course, I think it would be very hard to morally justify. But where I think the case that I would feel in favor of it falls is like it's far closer to kind of like the death penalty, like it's like kind of a margin, I guess, on the death penalty part, as opposed to, if you just connect the dots and you look at the two endpoints, that feels like more universal in some sense. And I think that where like if you think of drawing the line of violation of bodily autonomy, like where you would put on that spectrum, I think that this is like very, very, very close to, or there's like a very thin slice where this would fall. And if you zoomed into the slice, I would really, it would be really interesting if you posed it this way to a bunch of people, and I don't know if in school you guys have these sort of like experimentation, what are they, like qual whatever, like psychological experiments, if you get a chance to try this, but to pose that hypothetical with all the constraints and stuff like that, and then see how people respond. Because it doesn't seem that crazy if you take all of those things into consideration, that you're the responsible party, you cause something that's life-threatening to them, you're being punished in a way that's not life-threatening for you, and also like the punishment is like exact in terms of the harm that you caused.
Right.
Then it seems like I don't feel like it is super, super crazy, even if it does violate.
Well,
Bodily
I mean,
autonomy.
I'm not really interested in what people would think about just the situation presented rawly. I would also want to know, what do they think after they entertain the arguments for and against, and what do they think about the individual moral principles that are being endorsed, that together compose the situation.
So, but I
Though
think
I
I
would
see
be
it
interested in hearing
opposite
all of
though,
those
right?
things.
But I think it's like
Sorry?
opposite. Or sorry, I think it's like opposite though, right? Because the way you're seeing it is violation of bodily autonomy is like atomic, and I think it's like the reverse. I don't think that violation of bodily autonomy is atomic. I think that there's a lot of things that in between which like could be reasonable. One of which is the death penalty, and it seems a lot of people are in favor of that.
What do you mean by atomic?
Atomic is that you're saying these are individual principles that are building up this hypothetical case, right? Like that's the way
Yeah.
you're seeing it. You're saying the not the hypothetical case, but the conditioned case. The conditioned case is like built up of smaller things. One of which is a violation of bodily autonomy. And for me, the way I'm looking at
Yeah,
it
I
is
think bodily autonomy is a relevant factor that counts for and against specific moral situations or moral claims, but I don't think it's the only relevant factor, if that's what you're asking. But I maybe what you're saying is bodily autonomy is not intrinsically relevant to a moral situation. It's only extrinsically relevant because bodily autonomy only matters insofar as it has something to do with the consequences. Um,
or yeah, or that like in almost every case, most people might be against violation of bodily autonomy, but that doesn't mean
okay.
that in every single case that is necessarily true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not an absolutist, so I don't think, if you could pluck someone's hair in order to save 1,000 people from drowning, like I don't think that it would be wrong to pluck their hair. I never advocated for an absolutist principle, but I did suggest that there might be multiple relevant factors in a moral evaluation, and just knowing the consequences is not enough to make a determination about what's right or wrong.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not a consequentialist, strictly speaking, but I do think consequences are relevant, and they're one of the things you should account for
Yeah.
in a moral evaluation.
I don't think the perspective I'm taking is like super consequentialist either, but the counter argument here is it feels like the principle that could be violated, or I guess it feels like the principle that you think should never be violated or shouldn't be violated as punishment, I guess. It I feel like it's not as black and white as that, and that there are at least two cases that I would personally feel where it would seem sensible or not morally bad to violate it. And I think that subtlety or that nuance is kind of, I think it's like important in making a judgment in this case.
Yeah, we disagree about whether the special circumstances of a unwanted pregnancy that results from irresponsible actions on the part of the parents constitutes an exception to the general weight that I place in favor of bodily autonomy. That seems to be our disagreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's been true from the beginning. I don't really think there's anything else to pursue
Sure.
there, though. I mean, I think we've pretty much played it out. All right. Sounds interesting. I wish you best of luck. Thank you for all of your engagement on those issues, and I guess reach out to me if there's any topic that inspires you.
Awesome. All right, man.
Okay.
Take care. Bye bye.